everyone, welcome back to another instalment of Featured with Three Left Feet. I am your host, Jay Ran, she, her, and today I am joined by a friend. Tom, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, hi, my name is Tom Wilson and my pronouns are he, him.
Awesome. Could you just begin, Tom, by telling a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do?
Yeah, I'd say primarily I'm a writer that does acting, and I love the whole performative aspect of writing. So getting to act your own work, whether that be monologues or poems or plays. I love the whole kind of spoken text nature about being able to perform something that you've written, and I think being an actor gives you a different perspective on doing it.
Awesome. So you've kind of answered this already, but art is such a broad term. How would you personally define yourself as an artist? And we ask this of everyone who's been on Featured so far.
Well, yeah, like I said, kind of the whole kind of performative aspect of it, but also kind of I like to use both my art as a kind of sort of a catalyst for how I'm feeling, and sort of I guess art can be the result of fuel, if that makes sense. How emotional fuel that can make you want to write something when you're sad or write something when you're happy. And I guess I very much kind of discovered my love for creating art and writing poetry and writing all of that stuff as a reaction of going through emotional times. And I think um, I've discovered a love and a passion for it through those times and through getting to create art, basically.
Was that something that you discovered quite early on in your life?
I don't not necessarily. No, I think early on I come from like an actory background, in the sense of my parents did it, my family did it, and I think I've always been around the sort of actor side, more like the performer side. But it was only until, say, first year of uni that I'd sort of done more sort of like creative writing sides as like an emotional outlet. Um, I mean, uni itself can be a very kind of like daunting experience, like lots of different, new stuff happening, and I think it was easy to process a lot of those emotions of, just sort of a turbulent time in your life with being able to write it down. And I think there's like an ultimate joy in then being able to share how you feel without necessarily saying exactly how you feel.
Yeah.
Um, with just the ability to, say, perform at open poetry nights, perform at open mic nights, and say how you feel without saying how you feel. And I think metaphor in itself is like the ultimate kind of, staple of art, basically.
That's so weird to me. It's so annoying that you've only really been doing this for, under so many, like under a decade, and yet you're so talented.
Oh, thank you,
Um,
Sharon.
that's not fair. Um, so you spoke about coming from a kind of a creative background. So would you say like how was that like growing up then, having that kind of, because a lot of us find art as a means of, I guess, an escape really from like our external factors or our social background, but your social background was art. So what was that like? What kind of impact did that have on you as a person and as an artist?
I mean, I guess it's always been more of a kind of popular art sort of perspective. So like the sort of stuff I learned at uni, sort of more avant-garde styles of art, I didn't really know about that until, a course at uni. So it was more sort of popular musicals that my parents were in. My granddad used to be like a, stage manager type who'd build sets, and my parents would perform in the sets he built. and my mum got choreography experience, and they both sing together. They're both triple threats, and from like Anything Goes to sort of Thoroughly Modern Millie, like loads of different types of musicals. Saw like almost twice a year throughout my entire childhood. So it's like there's always been like kind of like a motivation to sort of perform and to act and to, I say sing, I'm not much of a singer, but like, I've had the opportunity to perform with them, and there's always been that. I know sometimes some parents and some family members aren't supportive when someone wants to go into the arts and someone wants to do something with it. But I think because I've had that art background, I think there's always been a sense of, go for it, because they love it as much as I do.
That's awesome. You touched on this about using, writing as an emotional outlet. Would you say then that your kind of life experiences are what gives you inspiration, and like what fuels your writing then? What is your process like in terms of living through some experience to then creating some kind of epic poem, which touches on, on a range from Domino's Pizza to a reimagining of Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven? So what is that like?
When I'm writing poems and stuff, I'm always saying it out loud back to myself. So I'll always have the sense of what it sounds like first and foremost. And so I think that is the main sort of crux as to how I go about writing things, how it sounds like. And because I do want to, because, I'm a bit of an attention seeker, as a lot of artists are. Yeah. I think there's an element of, I want to perform the poem. And I think, so for instance, if it's on a page, it might not have that same kind of like spoken word element. So if it's being performed, it's going to innately have a sound or a rhythm or a fluidity to it. And so I think that's very important first and foremost. And in terms of kind of like the sort of emotional fuel side to it, I think I like to write as a kind of outlet for how I'm feeling. I know a lot of artists, especially in lockdown, have used the sort of dire circumstances that art is in as an industry and they themselves are in, and they've used that to sort of fuel their art. So there's plenty of lockdown creations based upon the emotion and how it's felt to be lonely in lockdown. And I think that's very much kind of my sort of stance. It's art as a outlet for not feeling yourself or not feeling how you want to be. I think I do sort of art both on the, both emotional spectrums, but sort of, I think I focus more on the sort of, most of my poems are kind of depressing, to be honest. And I guess sadness has more emotional weight to it in terms of fuel, because you can be sad, but it has such a strong reaction in your mind about how you feel and how you process certain memories and certain emotions, how you go through certain thought processes. And that can very much influence how you write creatively. So sometimes when I do feel sad, I'm disappointed that I'm feeling sad, but I'm like, yes, I get to write on steroids, And yeah, that's whether that be like writing monologues or poems or anything. It's just, I think a lot of wonderful art has been created through someone not feeling that great and they wanted to write about it in a creative way.
Yeah. So just to clarify for people watching, what I know what you do, but your main focus is poetry, script writing, screenwriting. Like when you're feeling that, what medium then is like the best way of exploring whatever it is that you're processing? What do you go to? What's your go-to?
I think it depends on circumstances, because if it's sort of a more sort of social problem, more sort of if something like has happened recently and I'm just trying to thought process that, or can't get to sleep and I'm thinking about it, then I think that's very apt for a poem, because a poem can be as short or as long as you want, and I kind of think sometimes it's very nice to kind of write until you kind of feel like you've got a consensus on how you're going to deal with it as a person and how you're going to emotionally sort of compartmentalize it. Whereas I think other things that are kind of like long term, sort of like a job or just something like that's happening in the long term or has happened in your life, I think that's, for me at least, that's very apt for writing something longer, like a play. And yeah, I mean, I've not written as many plays as poems, and I've certainly not like released as many plays as poems into the world. But it's nice to just write a scene of two characters talking out your problems or your feelings, and just seeing how those characters would deal with it. And it's easy to sort of then view yourself in those characters and how you'd respond to certain situations.
You and I know each other because we both went to Lancaster University. And you said before that through the course and open mic nights and through meeting other people, like that's how you discovered writing. Was that your first experience in this primary practice that you do, or did you have kind of, little taster sessions throughout your life, and then that's where it exploded?
I guess the sort of element of, I'd done English language in A level, so I was always kind of, I had to do kind of like creative writing sort of stuff for like exams and stuff. So I had like bits and pieces. But I'd never sort of done it as a hobby. And then when I got to university, I was surrounded by so many great creatives, particularly one of my friends, Amber. She wrote an entire play, and I'm like, well, if someone my age could do it, then, maybe I could do it as well. And also this sort of, what you study, particularly in the Leica course that we both did, you're surrounded by so many different types of theatre and so many ways of people expressing themselves. And I guess it's, you dive headfirst into the deep end of, there are so many different avenues you can explore in terms of creating art, and you might not necessarily think about it at the time, but you sort of pick it up through osmosis, like that, I could do something like this, I could do something like that. And I particularly, I think one of my styles for writing plays is I like combining the whole element of kind of supernatural, kind of fantastical themes with very kind of like mundane stuff to sort of like counter each other. And very much I got inspired by a play I saw at Edinburgh Fringe called, I think it was Vampire Hospital Waiting Room. And it was just right up my street. It was like, it wasn't as deep as like things, because like I try and make things a bit deeper, but like for what it was just, hilarious. It was silly humor, really great characters, and I saw the guy who played the main vampire on the Mile, and I'm like, gosh, I'd love to write something like that. And he told me to go for it. So ever since then I've been trying to experiment with different themes, different kind of like sets of characters, partly because of my love for Vampire Hospital Waiting Room.
Amazing. You can credit them then.
Oh no, they're not getting credit.
Oh, okay, of course. Sorry.
No,
Sorry.
joke.
Of course, yeah. And shout out to Amber as well.
Yeah.
I love how Lancaster, the course kind of, it was my exposure as well to different avenues of theatre. And I think as, you know, children like craving art, sometimes we're very limited in what our expectations of what art is and what it can be. And I think whether a lot of people, they may not have liked it, but they did learn that, you know, there's so many different ways to express yourself creatively, to find different types of creative people. And yeah, I totally agree that it's kind of like osmosis, like whether you really realize it or not, but afterwards you're like, oh yeah, that I can do this or I can do this. And I find that just fascinating to learn. Something that I want to touch on that you brought up earlier, you said that because you are an actor yourself, your style of writing, you imagine it and you craft it in a way that an actor would perform it or yourself would perform it. I know that a lot of writers, they may not necessarily have that in mind when they're writing because they're just writing. And me, myself, when I'm writing something very personal, I find it almost, truthfully, I find it a bit embarrassing to perform it myself because I'm like, well, it's me. But you seem to actually, that's what you're aiming for. And I was just wondering, what is that bridge between actor and writer? Where do you find that kind of sweet spot in the middle where you are performing, but you're not being yourself? Or if you are being yourself, what is that like? And, you know, what do you gain anything from it? Do you feel exposed? I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I know personally when I'm writing my own kind of very hard-hitting pieces, I'm afraid because I'm like, well, if I do it myself, they're going to know it's me. So, I mean, people perform it and people know it's me anyway, but I just wanted to hear a little bit about your perspective because that's something that you are actively trying to achieve, it seems.
I guess there's always kind of like an element going back to the idea of like metaphor. And I think I don't think I'd ever write in a script, Tom did this and he felt sad. I think there's I mean, for me personally, there's always an element of whatever text gets produced, there will be an element of the author within the text.
Yeah.
And I guess it's basically how much you dial it up, how much you dial it back. And for me personally, I really like the idea of, yes, there is an element of, say if I, say in a script, there's an element of me in there and there's an element of my sort of world experience, my thought processes, but I'd never want to kind of siphon the actor's ability to sort of interpret that themselves. I'd always, for instance, in my scripts, I use very kind of little stage directions because I'd always want to encourage the actor to form their own kind of emotional. I'm not someone who would specifically say, on this line, do this. This line, You're meant to be feeling this. The character's meant to be feeling this. I'm very much someone who, actor, just go for it. If you think this is what the character's feeling, who am I to stop you? My work as a writer is already in there in the words that's being said. I don't need to influence you in how you're going to act it. And I think because of that sort of line, it gives you a lot of opportunities to experiment with distance from a writer's perspective and also from an actor's perspective. And I guess, it'll always be implicit in the fact that you wrote it. But I think there's something lovely about seeing your work performed by other people. And I think, for me at least, that's moved me towards more of the writing side now, rather than the acting.
How does that change then when you're performing yourself? If you're performing at an open mic night, you're performing a poem, because why you placed that word there. You know what this line is supposed to mean. Do you kind of switch into actor mode and just perform it, or do you read it as a writer? I'm not phrasing this maybe particularly well, but I hope you understand the meaning I'm going for.
I guess it's very much when I'm performing a poem that I wrote, there are certain kind of, there are chances you can do to speed up, to sort of emphasize certain phrases, and I think because because you wrote that yourself, you naturally have a knack for sort of making those decisions and packing as much sort of punch as possible. And I think in terms of just performing your own work, I think on one hand it's very daunting because you're hiding behind a metaphor, and there's always a sense of you want people to sort of see through, but not completely. You still want to have that level of distance maintained that, you can choose to believe what this means. I'm not confirming or denying. But, it's very much kind of, I think it gives you a sense of ownership and power. I think the difference between performing a play and performing a poem is, a multitude of factors, but primarily is that I think with a poem you have a larger sense of ownership, in a sense of it's a stream of words that have come directly from your mind, whereas with a play it's sort of you have to think about different act structures. Not that they can't be as personal, but it's just I kind of feel a poem is a lot more direct into kind of an introspective into someone's mind.
I have to agree with all of that. I'm curious to know what stories, because you're a storyteller, whether you are acting or whether you're writing, you are a vessel for storytelling. I ask this usually of the writers or of the artists, but what stories do you want to tell? And part B, what stories do you think need to be told?
Personally, I like stories, and I think it's both part A and B can be answered in kind of like one question. I like stories that don't offer solutions. And I know that sounds very strange, but I think sometimes it's very reassuring to know that someone else doesn't know what to do either. And I'm fed up of loads of feel good stories being like, oh, you can solve depression if you just be happy, and loads of different, sometimes it's okay to admit in a piece of art or in a piece of storytelling, you don't know what the answer is, but the best you can do is be a good person and try. And I think for me, that's very kind of an important aspect of not just storytelling that needs to be told, but also life, because there are a lot of big problems in the world that I believe we can fix, but I don't think it's always important, especially for your own emotional health, to be constantly thinking you have the responsibility to fix it yourself. There's no shame in asking for help. There's no shame in, thinking about the problem, but understanding that you can't fix it alone. And I think for me, it goes back to the adage that sometimes you don't need to offer a solution to how someone's feeling. You can just listen to them. And I think that is storytelling innately. It's listening to someone, but with extra steps. It's, that's the type of story I like writing. And I think it's very cathartic.
I think sometimes the best solution you can offer is just knowing that you're not isolated, and knowing that, there are other people out there who are experiencing and feeling that what you are as well. Yeah, I agree. Is there anyone in particular that you're interested in collaborating with or working with in the future?
I guess just a wide range of creatives. So I've collaborated with singer and songwriters. I've collaborated with sort of videographers, and I guess I just want to do more of that basically, and more talented people in the arts, whether that be actors or anyone really. I'd love to do it.
Awesome. Well, hopefully after this, you'll have many people wanting to come and work with you, as they already have done. I just want to very briefly touch on, because obviously Featured and Three Left Feet is based in the Northwest. What, and you yourself are from Greater Manchester, what is so important about art in the Northwest?
I think there's an element of we're the underdogs, and I think there's an element of particularly the North itself as a wider sort of demographic is often we're underappreciated in terms of, a voice, especially in the country. Not to say there aren't other important voices that need to be heard as well. I think there have been great pieces created that are from a viewpoint that is just iconically Northwest, like Road, for instance. And I think basically just the Northwest is such a kind of, we have a particular viewpoint and a particular worldview where we're underdogs, and we're not really treated the same as people from the South. And not to say that the South, people from the South don't struggle as well, but I kind of feel it's a different type of, we're not treated as kind of the same artistic individuals. And I kind of think, it's always lovely to hear, particularly Northwestern, voices and stories. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think it's a very unique perspective and a unique culture of collaboration, which is, Northern. Thank you so much, Tom, for joining us today for this featured interview. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
So for people who want to get in touch, first of all, is there any projects you can very quickly tell us about that you're working on, and where can people find you on socials?
I'm actually, I've written a play, co-directing it with my friend Amber. It'll hopefully, fingers crossed, be at the end of the year. It's called The Graveyard Shift. It's about zombies working in a fast food restaurant, and it's all the kind of stuff I like. And also, if they want to connect to me, I've got like a sort of main Instagram, which is tom.wilson.507. Or if they want to see sort of more of my creative projects, I've got toms.poems on Instagram as well. And I just do all sorts there.
Thank you again for people who've taken the time to come and watch this. It means so much to us. Please continue to support the series and to share. And if you yourself are a creative or an artist who works in the Northwest, please reach out to us. As always, our email is featured@3leftfeet, and that's FEETURED at 3leftfeet.co.uk. So we would love to hear from you so we can connect and champion the wonderful talent and voices that we have in this lovely part of the country. So take care as usual, and please join us again next time. Bye!